An elderly black woman, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes weary from a lifetime of struggle and triumph. Mrs. Eleanor Brown, a retired school teacher, a woman who spent decades molding young minds with patience and grace. Today, she's making a journey she's been dreaming of for years. A reunion with her only son, her pride, her joy, her everything. He bought her a first-class ticket as a surprise, a gesture of love, of honor, of respect, something she rarely felt from the outside world. But today was supposed to be different. She stepped onto the plane with the quiet dignity of someone who had earned her peace. She moved slowly, her cane tapping softly against the carpeted aisle. Her face held the kind of kindness that comes from living a life of service. But today, kindness was not what she would receive. The flight was nearly full. Business travelers, socialites, professionals with sleek briefcases and guarded eyes. And then there was Eleanor, simple, unassuming, her weathered purse held tightly to her chest. As she reached her seat, row 2, seat A, she felt a wave of relief. She had made it. First class, a luxury she'd only ever dreamed of. But then it began. "Ma'am," a sharp voice sliced through the hum of passenger chatter. "I think you're mistaken. This is first class." Eleanor looked up to see a woman standing over her, arms folded, expression hard and dismissive. The flight attendant's name tag read Sarah. Her eyes scanned Eleanor from head to toe, like she was inspecting something filthy that had drifted into a place it didn't belong. Eleanor offered a gentle smile, trying to break the ice. "Oh yes, my son booked this seat for me. Row 2, seat A." She held out her ticket with hands that trembled slightly. Sarah barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "This must be a mistake. First class is reserved for paying customers." The words stung. Eleanor's heart sank, but she held her composure. "My son paid for this ticket," she replied, her voice steady but soft. Sarah's lips curled into a tight, mocking smile. "Well, that's nice, ma'am, but I think you should check again. This area is for our premium guests." "Not," she trailed off, her eyes flicking dismissively over Eleanor's modest clothing, her worn shoes, her dark skin. Eleanor felt the eyes of the other passengers on her. Some looked away in discomfort. Others whispered amongst themselves. Phones were already being pulled out, fingers hovering over record buttons. But no one said a word. No one intervened. "Please," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm just trying to see my son. This is my seat." Sarah rolled her eyes, her patience clearly thinning. "Ma'am, you need to move. Now, before I call security." The threat was delivered with such casual cruelty. Eleanor felt her stomach twist. She had done nothing wrong. She had followed every rule, paid for the ticket, and yet, she was being treated like a trespasser. It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time it hurt this much. As Sarah walked away, Eleanor felt her cheeks burn with shame. The shame of being treated like she didn't belong, like she was an inconvenience, a problem. But as the plane began to fill and the whispers grew louder, Eleanor stayed rooted in her seat. She had every right to be there, and for once, she refused to be pushed aside. And that's when Sarah returned, this time with the head steward. Their voices were louder now, firmer, less civil. "You need to leave this seat, ma'am. We have confirmed there is an issue with your ticket." But my son," Eleanor tried to explain. "Your son?" "Sure," Sarah scoffed. "Unless your son is some kind of billionaire, I doubt he paid for this seat." The words echoed like a slap. Sarah's contempt was naked, unapologetic, and everyone was watching, judging. But what Sarah didn't know, what no one on that plane knew, was that Eleanor's son was more than capable of buying that ticket. He was, in fact, the man who owned the very airline they were flying on. And soon, very soon, the truth was about to explode. Not just for Eleanor, not just for Sarah, but for everyone who dared to question her worth. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your country or city in the comments below. It's amazing to see where all of you are tuning in from. And if you're ready for the shocking truth that's about to unfold, make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned till the end. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next. Mrs. Eleanor Brown sat frozen in her seat. Her fingers clutched the armrests like a lifeline. She could feel the judgment radiating from the other passengers. The whispers, the sidelong glances, the ridicule disguised as concern. Some stared at her as if she were an intruder. Others avoided her gaze, too uncomfortable to acknowledge what was happening. After all, it was easier to ignore injustice than to confront it. But Eleanor could feel the shame pooling in her chest, burning like acid. She had always been polite, respectful, careful not to cause trouble. But now she was being treated like a criminal for simply existing. Sarah returned with the head steward, Michael. His eyes were tired, his patience clearly worn thin. But it wasn't from Eleanor. It was from dealing with complaints, from passengers angry at the disturbance she was apparently causing. "Ma'am," Michael's voice was firm but measured, trying to sound reasonable. "We need to clarify your seating arrangement. If you could please step aside while we sort this out." Eleanor's voice trembled, her composure cracking under the weight of humiliation. "But this is my seat. I paid for it. Well, my son paid for it. It's a special trip." Michael glanced at Sarah, his brow creasing in frustration. It was clear he didn't believe her. Not really. After all, why would someone like Eleanor be sitting in first class? The prejudice was buried deep, wrapped in polite words and forced smiles. "Ma'am, if you can't produce valid identification for this seat, I will have to ask you to move to economy. If not, I'll be forced to contact security." Security? The word felt like a punch. Eleanor's heart raced, her breathing shallow. It was happening again, treated as if she were nothing, as if she didn't belong. But this time, the world was watching. Phones had already been pulled out, cameras rolling, people capturing the moment with the eagerness of spectators at tragedy. Before we continue, do you believe Mrs. Brown deserves to be treated like this? Comment justice for Mrs. Brown if you agree. And don't forget to subscribe because what happens next will leave you speechless. Let's take a step back. Let me show you who Mrs. Eleanor Brown really is. Because she is not just an elderly woman traveling alone. She is a testament to resilience. Born in the 1940s, Eleanor grew up in an era defined by segregation and inequality. She saw her parents struggle to make ends meet, battling a world that saw them as less than human. But Eleanor had something many others didn't: determination. She poured herself into her studies, devouring every book she could find. Knowledge became her weapon against a world that constantly tried to hold her back. By the age of 24, she had earned her teaching degree, a rarity for a black woman of her time. She spent her life teaching young minds, inspiring them, fighting for them, nurturing them, even when she was paid less, respected less, considered less. But her kindness, her unyielding spirit, that was something no one could take away. Now, retired and living alone, her only real joy came from her son, a man she raised to be strong, successful, and proud. A man who adored her more than anything else in the world. And it was him, her son, who had bought her that first-class ticket, a way to show her she was valued, respected, loved. But as she sat in that plane, her dignity was being stripped away piece by piece. And the people around her, most of them did nothing. They watched her suffer, their eyes flickering between curiosity and indifference. They were waiting to see if she would break. But Eleanor Brown was not someone who broke easily. Not now, not ever. She sat in that seat, refusing to move, refusing to be cast aside, because this time she was fighting not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. If you're still watching, it means you care. And if you care, make sure you stay until the end of this story, because how this all ends will change everything. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because stories like this, stories that matter, deserve to be heard. Also, drop a comment and tell us if you've ever been treated unfairly just because of who you are. Your voice matters. Your experience matters. Let's hear it. Eleanor Brown tried to hold her composure, but every moment that passed made it harder to breathe. The looks, the whispers, the humiliation. Sarah, the flight attendant, returned once more. But this time, her politeness was gone. Now, her voice was a weapon. Sharp, condescending, cruel. "Ma'am, I've spoken to the head steward and we've checked the records. There's no way you could have purchased this seat. If you do not move to economy, I will call security and have you escorted off this plane." Eleanor's heart pounded against her chest. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of them. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you, my son paid for this ticket. Row 2, seat A. This is my seat." Sarah's eyes narrowed, her expression twisted with disdain. "And who exactly is your son, ma'am? Some big shot I'm supposed to care about." The insult wasn't in the words. It was in the tone, the way Sarah looked at her like she was something filthy, something unwelcome. But Eleanor didn't answer, because she knew the truth wouldn't be believed. Not by Sarah, not by anyone on that plane. "If you don't move, I'm calling security. Last chance." Sarah's voice cut through the air like ice. Eleanor clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white. She felt the familiar burn of anger beneath her sadness. The years of being talked down to, dismissed, disrespected, all crashing down at once. But she remained seated, unyielding, unapologetic. Security was called. 2 uniformed men approached her with eyes that held no compassion, no understanding. They only saw her as a problem to be removed. They stood over her, their shadows stretching across the narrow aisle. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. Now." Eleanor shook her head, her voice trembling but firm. "No, this is my seat. I have done nothing wrong, and I will not be treated like this." But the men didn't care. They reached down, gripping her arms with rough hands, pulling her from the seat like she was nothing. Passengers gasped. Some turned their heads away, ashamed to watch. Others filmed with eager anticipation. The scent of scandal was irresistible. And through it all, Eleanor remained silent. As they dragged her down the aisle, her body trembling, her dignity shredded, she heard a woman whisper, "Why is she making such a fuss? Can't she just go to economy, where she belongs? Where she belongs." The words echoed in her mind like a curse. She felt her feet stumble over the carpeted floor as she was escorted out of the first-class cabin. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. She was placed in an economy seat, cramped, uncomfortable. But more than that, it was a seat she didn't deserve. A punishment for daring to believe she was worthy of something better. But what Sarah and those security guards didn't realize was that they had just made a grave mistake, one that would come back to haunt them. And this was just the beginning. If you're still here, I need you to do something important. Comment "justice for Eleanor" below if you believe she deserves better. Because this story isn't over. In fact, it's only just getting started. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss what happens next, because what's coming will leave you stunned. Eleanor sat in her cramped economy seat, her mind racing, her heart aching. She replayed the incident over and over again. The way Sarah looked at her with such contempt. The way security had manhandled her as if she were some kind of criminal. The humiliation was like a wound that refused to heal. She thought of her son, the man she had raised with every ounce of love and sacrifice she could give. The man who had gone from poverty to prosperity through sheer determination and brilliance. He had bought her that first-class ticket because he wanted her to feel special, to feel seen, to feel loved. But now she was nothing more than a spectacle, a joke. People around her continued to whisper. Some even laughed. And as the plane soared through the clouds, Eleanor felt her spirit begin to sink. The pain wasn't just for being treated unfairly. It was from knowing that no matter how hard she fought, no matter how much dignity she carried herself with, it would never be enough. Not to them, but this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because as Eleanor sat there, humiliated and broken, someone else was about to board that plane. Someone who would turn everything upside down. If you made it this far, drop a comment saying "I'm here for the truth." And let me know, what would you have done if you were in Eleanor's position? The injustice she faced is real, and what happens next will change everything. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and stay tuned until the very end, because the truth is about to be revealed. Eleanor Brown stared out the tiny oval window, her mind drifting somewhere far beyond the clouds. She had never felt so small, so undeserving. Everything about the situation felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. And the worst part? No one seemed to care. Passengers continued with their own lives, laughing, chatting, scrolling through their phones. The only acknowledgement of her existence came from their sideways glances, their judgmental stares. But Eleanor wasn't the only one aware of what had happened, because as she sat there, broken and humiliated, her son was already on his way to board that plane. You see, Eleanor's son wasn't just successful. He was powerful, a man who had built his empire from the ground up, a man who had faced racism and prejudice his entire life, and yet still rose to the very top of the aviation industry. His name was James Brown, the CEO of the very airline his mother was now sitting on. And when James learned of his mother's mistreatment, he was furious. But not just because it was his mother. It was because this was the very type of injustice he had spent his entire life fighting against. And now, it had struck the one person he cherished most. But James was a man of action, a man who believed that justice wasn't something you waited for. It was something you created, and that's exactly what he intended to do. Have you ever been in a situation where you were treated unfairly and no one stood up for you? Comment, "I stand with Eleanor," if you've ever faced injustice. And make sure you subscribe right now, because what's about to happen next will shake everyone on that plane to their core. James Brown was not the kind of man who let things slide. He was relentless, fearless, and most importantly, he was protective. His phone call to the airline's customer service had been brief, cold, the voice on the other end trembling as they realized who they were speaking to. The CEO was on his way, and he was furious. Meanwhile, back on the plane, Eleanor could feel the sting of her own failure. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter. There was just a seat, just a ticket, just another flight. But it was more than that. It was about dignity, respect, and her right to exist in a world that constantly tried to push her down. As the plane taxied along the runway, preparing for takeoff, Eleanor closed her eyes. For a moment, she wished the plane would just take her far away from all the pain. But destiny had other plans, because even as the engines roared to life, James was already on board, and his presence was about to change everything. James was calm, but his anger was a force of nature. He spoke with authority, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "I want to speak to the head steward." Now, the gate agents hesitated, their eyes widening as they realized who he was. James didn't wait for their approval. He pushed past them, striding down the jet bridge with a fury that burned hot and cold at the same time. Inside the plane, Sarah continued her rounds, still smug from her earlier victory. But the passengers who had watched Eleanor's humiliation were restless, uneasy, because something was about to happen, and it was big. James entered the cabin, his presence undeniable. Some of the passengers gasped, others whispered, and a few even tried to hide their phones, embarrassed for having recorded the incident like it was some cheap entertainment. But James didn't care about them. His eyes searched the rows of seats, looking for one person, the only person who mattered. When his gaze finally found her, his mother, sitting hunched over in a cramped, uncomfortable seat meant for someone who had paid far less. The rage in his eyes was unmistakable. But James wasn't there to yell, or scream, or threaten. He was there to restore what had been taken, his mother's dignity. And Sarah, the flight attendant who had humiliated Eleanor, was about to find out who she had really been speaking to. If you're still watching, then you're here for the truth. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Comment, "I'm ready" below if you're still with us. And if you believe Eleanor deserves justice, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe right now. Because James Brown is about to confront the very people who disrespected his mother. And you won't believe what happens next. James Brown's presence alone was enough to make everyone stop and stare, to feel his fury like heat radiating off him. But the person who felt it most was Sarah. She saw him approaching, tall, commanding, the look in his eyes like fire. But even then, she had no idea who he truly was. He reached her, his voice cutting through the cabin like a blade. "Are you the one who humiliated my mother?" Sarah blinked, confusion crossing her face before arrogance took over. Sir, if you're referring to the woman who refused to cooperate with security, then yes. She was causing a disturbance in first class, claiming a seat that wasn't hers. James's gaze didn't waver. His voice remained steady, his tone deadly calm. Did you bother to check her ticket? To verify her claim before you treated her like a criminal? Sarah's eyes darted nervously to the other flight attendants, searching for support. But there was none to be found. Everyone was watching. Everyone was listening. Sir, her ticket was questionable. And this is a first-class cabin. We have standards. Standards? James echoed, his words laced with contempt. And what standards would those be, exactly? Ones that allow you to judge someone based on their appearance? Their age? Their skin color? The accusation hung heavy in the air, thickening the silence. Passengers who had been too afraid to speak up now felt their shame growing like a weight in their chests. James took a step closer, his voice lowering, but somehow becoming even more powerful. My mother, the woman you just humiliated, is Eleanor Brown, and the ticket she was holding was paid for by me. Sarah's lips parted, her eyes widening with panic. Sir, I apologize if there was a misunderstanding. James cut her off. A misunderstanding? No, this was deliberate. This was pure disrespect. And what you don't seem to understand is that I am the CEO of this airline. This plane, this crew, all of it, is under my authority. Sarah's face went pale, the blood draining from her cheeks as if someone had pulled a plug. She tried to stammer out another apology, her words stumbling over themselves like broken glass. But James wasn't interested in her excuses. He turned to the passengers, his voice booming through the cabin. All of you witnessed what happened here. You saw how my mother was treated. Some of you even recorded it. And I hope you did, because this is exactly the type of injustice I refuse to tolerate. Not on my airline, not in my life. The silence was absolute. No one dared speak. No one dare move. My mother was treated like she didn't belong, like she was something less. And I want every single one of you to understand that will never be acceptable. James's gaze swept over the passengers, his eyes fierce and unwavering. Then he turned back to Sarah, his voice like ice. You're done. Your career with this airline is over. Effective immediately, Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her lips quivering as she tried to protest. Please, I didn't know. No, James snapped. You didn't care, and now you face the consequences of that choice. If you're still here, then you've seen what happens when someone finally stands up against injustice. Comment "Justice served" if you believe James made the right choice. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and like this video, because this story isn't over, and what happens next will leave everyone speechless. James Brown could have left it at that. He could have fired Sarah and ended the confrontation, but he knew that wouldn't be enough. Not if he wanted real change. He turned to the passengers, his voice steady and sincere. What happened here today isn't just about my mother. It's about everyone who has ever been treated as less. Everyone who has ever been judged based on something as shallow as appearance. And if we, as a society, continue to accept this, then we are all complicit. He explained the importance of empathy, of recognizing bias and challenging it, of refusing to turn a blind eye when others are suffering. Today, it was my mother. Tomorrow, it could be someone you love. We must be better than this. All of us. The speech left everyone silent. Some nodded in agreement. Others lowered their heads in shame. But one thing was certain. No one on that plane would ever forget what had happened. If you believe in fairness, dignity, and respect for all, drop a comment saying equality matters. And if you want to see more stories like this, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because these are the stories that need to be told. Now, what would you have done if you were in James's position? Or Eleanor's? Let me know in the comments below. Your voice matters. James Brown had made his point. The flight attendant had been fired. The passengers had been confronted with their own silence, their own complicity. But for James, the most important part of this ordeal was still waiting. His mother. He knelt beside her, his voice breaking as he spoke. Mom, I'm so sorry you were treated this way. I can't take away what happened, but I promise you, things are going to change. Not just for you, but for everyone who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong. Eleanor's eyes glistened with tears, but her smile was gentle, forgiving. "James," she whispered, "it's not your fault. It's the world we live in. But thank you for standing up for me, for not letting them take my dignity away." James held her hand tightly, his resolve unshaken. "No one will ever take that from you again." Passengers began to applaud, a hesitant, scattered sound that grew louder. It was a gesture of shame, of guilt, of appreciation, and most of all, of recognition. But for James and Eleanor, the only thing that mattered was that they were together, that their bond was stronger than any prejudice, stronger than any hate. And what happened next? It would change the way everyone looked at each other, forever. Now, let me ask you something. Would you have stood up for Eleanor if you were there? Or would you have stayed silent like so many others did? Comment, "I will stand up," if you would have defended her. And share your thoughts about this story. What did it make you feel? What would you have done differently? And if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because stories like this, they need to be heard. Let's make sure the world knows that discrimination, in any form, is unacceptable. And if you're still watching right now, I want you to comment, "I'm still here to show your support." You made it to the end. You saw the truth. And now, your voice matters. Mrs. Eleanor Brown and her son James may have landed safely that day, but the message they left behind continued to spread. Because this was more than just a confrontation. This was a declaration, a stand against prejudice, against hatred, against everything that seeks to diminish our shared humanity. And that's why stories like this must be told, not just to entertain, but to awaken, to inspire, to demand change. If you believe in equality, if you believe in justice, if you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, then share this story. Comment "Justice and Equality for All." Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel is dedicated to the truth, to telling the stories that matter. And before you go, let me ask you one last thing. What would you have done if you were in Eleanor's place? Or James's? Let me know in the comments. Because your voice, it matters. Thank you for watching.